You won't believe what a couple simple mason jars can become and how they can revolutionize your pantry. Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm bringing you some more just add water meal in a jar recipes, and today we're doing Chinese takeout favorites. One rice and one noodle option to please everyone. Check in down below. Are you a noodle person or a rice person? The best thing about these recipes is you can mix and match and swap out protein and veggie options for infinite possibilities. So next time you're craving Chinese takeout, save yourself some time and money and grab a jar off the shelf. Just add water and you'll have a meal in no time. It'll also give you something a little different on the shelf in your emergency pantry for those times when you need it. Because let's face it, you can only live on beans and rice for so long. Let's jump right in and get started making these meals. All we're going to need for these meals is going to be a quart-sized mason jar. We don't need any special equipment. We're not pressure canning. We're going to be using our mason jar. We're going to be using a funnel to get our ingredients in and out of the jar. And we're just going to use some basic measuring utensils and then our ingredients. We are going to want the sealing type of lid for the mason jar. And we're going to need some oxygen absorbers if we want to seal these up for long-term storage on the shelf. Let's go ahead and get started. The first meal I'm going to do today is going to be a lo mein. And these are the lo mein noodles that I'm going to use today. There's lots of different kinds of lo mein noodles. These are a couple other examples of some that I have. I chose these because they are seem to be the easiest to find and get your hands on. They had these right at my Walmart, so I was able to easily get these. I have gotten these on Amazon. You can see these are wide. They're a little different. And these, I believe, I got at the Asian market because I couldn't find them online really at all. So I wanted something that people would be able to easily get. If you do look at the cooking instructions, they can vary a lot. So these say cook for 3 minutes. These say cook for about 4 minutes. These say cook for 6 minutes. So for that reason, I wanted to make sure that everyone would be able to stick with the same brand, because if you change up the brand and the cooking time, it's definitely going to change that cooking time for the dish, but it also might change the water amounts. If it's cooking less time, it's probably absorbing less water and things like that. So we just want to make sure that everyone's going to get the same results. Because there can be such a variation between brands, I always put links to the brands of products that I used in my recipes down in the description box below the video so that you can find the same thing I used if you want to. Now this is a 14-ounce package of noodles, but I'm not going to use the whole package, and they're very difficult to measure because they're long and thin and they would stick out of the measuring cup. So what I ended up doing was using my kitchen scale just so I could get an accurate measurement for everyone to be able to follow the recipe. But I did end up using half of this package, so it was 7 ounces. So if you don't have a kitchen scale, you can just basically eyeball half the package. All right, so that's a little bit too much. All right, so there's 7 ounces of noodles. So what I did to get these to fit in the jar, because I tried several things. Once I tried breaking them up into like thirds or fourths into short pieces, thinking they would fit in the jar better. And that didn't work so well because they got all jumbled and they just took up so much space. So what I found works best is just taking the bundle of noodles, and I broke them about 2/3 of the way up. So I have one long bundle of noodles, and I'm going to just slide that down right along the side of the jar, keeping them all upright and together as best as I can. And then I'm just going to put the smaller bundle down at the bottom, once again keeping them together as best I can. Those can be upright or laying down, the ones at the bottom. And then I'm going to kind of keep this jar tilted like this while I get the other ingredients ready, just so that those noodles stay together like that, because otherwise it's too difficult to fit all of the other ingredients in. But if these stay together like this, I can fit plenty. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add my protein, and I'm going to be using pork today. This is freeze-dried pork. You are going to want to use freeze-dried meats in these meals in a jar. Now, like I mentioned, you can swap it out for many different proteins, anything you want. So you could use chicken, you could use beef, you could use shrimp if you have freeze-dried shrimp, any protein that you want. I'm using pork today because the freeze-dried pulled pork that I buy is on sale this month, so I know I've stocked up on it. So I'm going to use it in some meals in a jar. The one caveat with pork is that it has a shorter open shelf life. All of these meats have a 25-year shelf life when they're sealed in their cans. Once this is opened, it's supposed to be used within about 3 weeks or sealed up again immediately. I haven't had any issues with it. I've had mine open a lot longer than that, but because it could be an issue, I think they have to put that date on it. I feel perfectly comfortable opening up a fresh can, putting it into my meals in a jar, sealing it up airtight with an oxygen absorber, and keeping it for several years. But depending on how you feel about that, that might be another reason for you to choose chicken or beef or another protein instead. And I'm going to be using 1 cup of the meat today. Now, once we get a few more ingredients in here, I will not have to leave this tipped like that. It's just going to make it easier for now. Now, I'm going to recommend, if you have any large chunks like this one, I'll see if there's any more in here. This is a pretty large chunk. Because this is cooked and shredded pulled pork, the pieces can be in varying sizes. And the bigger the piece, the longer it takes for the moisture to get back into the meat. And so if you have any pieces that are a lot larger than all the other pieces, they might not be fully moistened all the way through when your dish is done, especially with a dish like this that cooks very, very quickly. So you can just break this up just like you would with, fresh pulled pork. So I recommend if you're using pulled pork or a shredded beef or a shredded chicken product, something that might have various different sizes, that you try to make them a little bit more uniform so you don't have some that may not get done. It is fully cooked, so that's not what we're worried about. We're just worried about it getting the moisture all the way back into the center of the meat so that it's right back to the quality of fresh meat. So now I'm going to go ahead and try to get this meat down into my jar without disturbing those noodles too much. Now, I think that the meat will hold the rest of the ingredients upright pretty well for now. I can give this a little bit of a tap to work it all down to the bottom so I have room for everything else. I am going to add my sauce ingredients next because they're going to filter down into the spaces amongst that pork and leave us more room in the jar. I'm going to start with some soy sauce powder. Now, I will have a link for my source for this down in the description box below the video. I actually just ordered, I think, 3 more pounds of this because this is one of my more commonly used ingredients in some of the meals in a jar that we really enjoy. Now, with powdered ingredients like this, I do usually keep them stored in mason jars with that same airtight lid, just so that I don't have any problems with them getting clumpy. And this seems to work really well. I'm just going to use a leveler to get this spot on and add my 1/4 cup of soy sauce powder. Next, I'm adding some brown sugar. Now, this is granulated brown sugar, so it's dry and it's free-flowing. It doesn't have, you can see that it doesn't stick together. It doesn't have that moisture that regular brown sugar has. So this is what I use for meals in a jar when I want a brown sugar. I'm using 2 tablespoons, which is the same as 1/8 of a cup. So if you have 1/8 of a cup measure, you can just use 1 of those. Next, I'm going to use some chicken bouillon. Now, this chicken bouillon I'm just using up, and so this one actually does have MSG in it. If you're trying to avoid MSG in your Chinese food, like a lot of us might be, I will link an MSG-free chicken bouillon down below. That's what I usually use when I don't have something like this that I bought for some reason and need to use it up so it doesn't go to waste. But I am using a teaspoon of the chicken bouillon. Next, I'm going to use some umami seasoning. Now, umami is the 5th basic taste. That's a word and a term I had never even heard until the last several years. And it's the 5th taste. Like, we usually think of sweet, salty, bitter, and sour, and umami is a 5th taste element. It's a Japanese word that that means savory, delicious savory taste. And the umami flavor is usually thought to be a rich, meaty, deep flavor. And it's often provided by MSG in Asian dishes. And since some people are sensitive to MSG and want to leave it out of their food when they cook it, this is sort of a way to add that umami flavor that doesn't have MSG. So I'm using 1/2 teaspoon of this. It'll also help with some of those flavor elements that just aren't available to us in a dry form. There's a lot of ingredients in Asian food that I use a lot when I cook, like fish sauce and oyster sauce and hoisin sauce and things like that, that I have never found in a powdered form. So an umami seasoning can help replace some of the elements that we don't have there. Next, I'm going to add my vegetables. And like I mentioned, this is another place that you can change it up and use what you like, use what you have, use what you can get on sale. Use what sounds good to you. You can really change up the vegetables a lot based on your tastes. I'm going to start with some dried cabbage because I feel like this will go well in this dish. Now, this is a Savoy cabbage, I believe, so it's not your typical just regular green cabbage, which I think goes perfectly in a dish like this. I am using a half a cup of the dried cabbage. And next, I'm going to use some freeze-dried green beans. Now, I'm using these because I think that they will go well in this dish, and they'll go well with the pork. I think they go well in a lot of Asian food. And they're also on sale like the pork, so I know that I can stock up on these to put together a lot of meals with green beans. I'm going to use a half a cup of the green beans. Next, I'm using some dried carrots. And I'm going to be using 2 tablespoons of these, which is the same as 1/8 of a cup once again. So if you don't have this 1/8 of a cup measure, you can use 2 tablespoons. Next, I'm putting in some freeze-dried green onions, which goes really good in Asian food. I'm going to use 2 tablespoons again. Now you can see that our jar is getting pretty full, but we've still got some room in there. For my final vegetable, I'm going to use some freeze-dried mushrooms. I love mushrooms. I think they'll go really well in here. Some other vegetables I think would go well in here would be some celery. You could put in some red or green bell peppers. I think some broccoli would go well in this dish. But use your imagination and use what you have on hand. So that is a 1/4 cup of mushrooms. And finally, a couple of seasoning ingredients. I'm going to use some freeze-dried minced garlic, a half a tablespoon of that, and some freeze-dried minced ginger. I'm going to also use a half a tablespoon of the ginger. And these freeze-dried minced products are going to have a lot fresher flavor than if you were to use garlic powder and ginger powder. But if that's all you have, you could substitute that. You would probably want to use about a half a teaspoon of those. But the other thing I'm going to add to this jar is a packet of sesame oil. Now, sesame oil gives a really, really great flavor to a lot of Asian dishes. And it's a flavor I've never really found in a powdered form. You can get sesame seeds. I've found seasonings with sesame in it, but it's just never quite the same as actual sesame oil. Now, this is the package they came in, and you can see it says best by the end of August in 2026. And I've had these for a while. I've been using them for a while. I believe it looks like they were probably packed in February of 2024. So that would mean that they have about a 2.5-year shelf life at least, because the shelf life of your jar meal is going to be limited by the shelf life of the lowest shelf life ingredient. But I do expect that, like most things, this would last well past the date that's given on it. And that's another benefit for keeping it in a separate package. If you were to make this meal and you could open this package up and just give it a little sniff, and if it smelled rancid because it had been 5 years or something and it didn't smell good, it wouldn't have contaminated the rest of your jar. But I know that we use these jars up when we need a convenient meal, so it's not going to be on my shelf forever. But I do expect if this was sealed with an oxygen absorber, even with the sesame oil packet, even with the pork, even with a couple of dehydrated vegetables rather than all freeze-dried, I would expect it to get at least 3 years shelf life out of this meal. So I'm going to go ahead and place this packet of sesame oil on the top of my jar. Now, if I were putting this away for long term, I would add an oxygen absorber here as well and then seal it with the lid. Now, oxygen absorbers come sealed airtight, and once you open them up, you need to work quickly and then seal whatever you don't use up again airtight, or they'll be all used up and they won't be any good. So for that reason, I like to do my jar meals in batches so that I can open up a pack of, say, 10 oxygen absorbers, and I can, use them all up at once. And then if you have any left over that you didn't use in a mason jar like this, can be a good way to seal them. But I prefer to use them up if I can. And making meals in batches can be a really great thing to do because it's really, really fast and easy. You know, a lot of people like to do batch cooking. You can get a lot of meals on your shelf really quickly. The one caveat is that if you're trying a new recipe for the first time, I always recommend that people try it once, just like I'm doing today. You know, make up the jar, don't put it away on the shelf, just cook it up for dinner, try it, see if your family likes it, because everybody has different tastes. Not every family likes the same things. My family loves this. That doesn't mean your family will as well. And then once you've tasted it, you can adjust any seasonings if it's too salty, if it's not salty enough, if you needed to do a little more water or a little more cooking time. Any changes you need to make, note them down. And then once you've made it to your liking, then you can make them up in bulk. But right now, this lo mein is ready to go on the shelf, or in our case, it's going to go right in the pot, and I'm going to show you how fast and easy this can turn into a meal for your family. To prepare these meals, I'm going to use my butane emergency burner. I like to show this in action because this is such an inexpensive stove, and it's just really basic, easy to operate, works really well. I think it's something that just about everybody should have if they can, because it just gives you a way that anytime the power's out, if you have an electric stove, anytime that you need an alternative way to cook, you have a way to heat your food, to cook some food, to boil some water, have a hot drink, something like that. The fuel is pretty inexpensive and it is easy to store. And incidentally, I think the best place that I have found to get this type of fuel is an Asian market, because it's just really cheap there. To fix the lo mein, I'm going to use a large skillet, and I'm going to go ahead and just empty my jar right into the skillet. Of course, I've got to remove my sesame oil packet first, and if we had put an oxygen absorber in here and had this had been on the shelf for a while, then we'd take the oxygen absorber out as well. Now, because we've got quite a bit of powder stuck on the inside of this jar, I almost always like to put the water for the recipe into the jar and use it to rinse the jar. And of course, you actually have measurements for cups on the side of the jar if you ever need to use that, if you're in a situation where you don't have measuring utensils. This recipe is going to use 3.5 cups of water. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the water right into my jar first. And I'm just going to use the water to rinse out the jar as I fill the skillet. This was cold water. Now I am going to start by giving this a mix. I'm going to try to get all of the meat and things like that down into the liquid, because that's going to take the longest, the meat in this recipe. These noodles actually cook pretty quickly. Everything is fully cooked other than the noodles. The meats and vegetables don't really need to be cooked. They just need to be refreshed and rehydrated and have the moisture put back into them, because that's all that's been done to them, is that they've had the water removed so that they can have a very long shelf life. The one thing you want to watch with this dish is that these noodles don't stick together and that they don't stick to the bottom of the pan as it's heating, because that can tend to happen with these kind of noodles. Because these are long and straight, they tend to stick together. Any noodles like this, I have that issue with. So I like to keep them moving as we go. And once they get softer, they will, move around a lot more and they won't be so stuck together. So I'm going to turn on the heat to a medium temperature and bring this up to a simmer. I do have a lid nearby for this pot, but like I said, I'm going to stir this pretty regularly just to make sure that it doesn't stick, and to try to keep the meat pieces submerged as much as I can. This will become easier as the pasta starts to soften. This is being cooked as a one-pot pasta dish, and the idea with those dishes is that the pasta is cooked with all the other ingredients and all the liquid for the recipe, and it absorbs the liquid as it cooks, and there's nothing left to drain. Of course, you could separate this out into its different elements and cook the noodles separately and then cook everything else up, make your sauce, and mix it all together, but that kind of defeats the purpose of these meals in a jar as being really quick and easy, and also being emergency friendly, where you wouldn't want to waste a bunch of water that you drained out of a pot. It can change the texture of a pasta dish a little bit. It can really just kind of, because the starch from the pasta stays in the dish, and so it kind of thickens it up a little bit. It can be a good thing. It can actually be helpful to the dish. It just kind of depends on the dish, but it's just a really convenient and non-wasteful way to cook a pasta dish like this. Once again, if you see any large chunks of meat that you think might have trouble becoming moist all the way through, you can go ahead and break those up against the side of the pan with your spoon if you want to, or use your fingers, whatever you have available to you. This is starting to boil, so I am going to turn it down and try to just keep it at a simmer for about 5 minutes. And I am going to stir it pretty regularly to make sure, once again, that it doesn't stick. You can see that the natural starches from the pasta are thickening this liquid. Now, a lot of lo mein recipes that you'll see, using all fresh ingredients might use cornstarch or something else to thicken the sauce, but we definitely don't need that in this case because we get the natural thickening from the pasta's own starch. All right, so it's been about 5 minutes since this came to a simmer, and I just kept it at a simmer and stirred it a few times, and you can see it's thickened up nicely. Our vegetables appear to be done. Let's see if we can find a bigger piece of meat and see how that seems very tender. So what I'm going to do now is we're just going to let this set for about 5 or 10 more minutes. I am going to add the sesame oil in now for that setting time. And this will thicken up a little bit more and make sure that everything is tender while it's setting. Sesame oil is more of a finishing oil than it is a cooking oil, so it's not something you would usually, well, I suppose you could, but it's generally used to finish a dish more than it is and to give it flavor, more than it is to saute or to do the initial cooking of the dish. All right, so I'm going to let this set for a little bit, 5 or 10 minutes, and then it should be ready to serve. Here is our lo mein ready to serve. All right, let's give it a try. That's got good flavor. I like that a lot. The texture is good on the meat, showing off my lack of chopstick skills here. But it's a little bit saucier than what I usually get at a Chinese restaurant, and that's because of the effect of the one dish pasta cooking method that I told you about. But to me, it's worth it to get this done so easily in just one dish without any wasted water. And to have this flavor, I love the flavor. It's very, very good. And my kids really like this too. Next, I'm going to do the fried rice meal in a jar. Once again, I'm using pork today, but you can do any meat that you want for any kind of fried rice. You can even do a few jars of each for the most variety. Before I get started on this next meal, I do want to let you know that coming up in a few days, there's going to be a massive end of the year blowout sale on freeze-dried meats and proteins. Basically, every single protein is going to be on sale. So it's going to be a great time to grab as much as you possibly can at these prices. Because we all know prices are not going to be getting any better anytime soon. Things are going to be getting more and more expensive. So the more you can pack away now, the better off you'll be, and you'll be saving your future self a whole lot of money and creating a whole lot of peace of mind at the same time. Meats and proteins are always going to be the costliest part of any meal or any pantry, but they're also one of the most important parts. So it just makes sense to save money wherever we can and stock up as much as we can. Be sure to join my text alerts so you can check out the sale as soon as it goes live, and be sure that you're going directly to the best prices. There have been a ton of people waiting for this sale, so it's going to go fast. Okay, now on to the recipe. The next meal I'm going to make is going to be a fried rice. Now in our family, Mr. Wicked Prepared loves rice and fried rice, and the rest of us are noodle people. So we usually have both of these dishes in any takeout order we do or whenever we fix Chinese at home. And once again, I'm going to be using the pork for all the same reasons that I told you before that I used it in the lo mein. So I'm going to make a pork fried rice, but you could do any type of fried rice you wanted. You could do chicken fried rice, beef fried rice. You could use hamburger in it if you wanted. You could do shrimp. You could do ham if you happen to have freeze-dried ham. And keep in mind that you could also do either one of these dishes vegetarian if you wanted and just leave out the meat and replace it with extra vegetables or some other freeze-dried protein that you like. This time I'm going to be using 3/4 cup of the meat. Once again, I do recommend breaking up any larger chunks into smaller pieces so that they'll cook a little bit more evenly. That could also be done when you dump it into the pot to cook it, and it can also be done as you're cooking it. Just on the side of the pan with your spoon, you can break them up. We're going to need our funnel again, so I'm adding 1/2 cup of the meat and then another 1/4 cup. The next thing I'm going to use in my fried rice is these scrambled eggs with bacon. Now, this is actually meant to be like a meal, but this is the only way that I could find the cooked freeze-dried scrambled eggs other than making them myself. And I like to use ingredients in these meals that are commercially available to make sure that even people without a freeze dryer can make these meals. Because a lot of people think you have to have a freeze dryer to do this, and you absolutely don't. All of this stuff is available commercially. But like my other ingredients, I'll put a link down in the description box to where I found this. Now, I only want the egg portion out of this, so I'm leaving the bacon behind, or I thought what I would do is pick out all the bacon and keep it separate. So if I wanted freeze-dried bacon in a recipe, I'd have it, because that's another thing that's really difficult to find by itself. But it's super, super, super tasty. So I've been just like munching on it, but I'm going to pick out the pieces of egg. Now, I want to tell you there's another option for this. If you didn't want to do this, if you didn't want to purchase this product and you don't have a freeze dryer to freeze dry your own scrambled eggs, well, of course, you could just leave them out and replace them with more protein or more veggies. But I like to have the scrambled egg in the fried rice. But the other thing you can do is just to use some scrambled egg powder. So this is just powdered eggs that you mix with water, and it makes basically like raw scrambled egg, and then you cook it up. So if you don't want to have this, but you have this, or you would rather buy this maybe because this has so many more uses, then you can just leave this out, and in its place, decide if you want 1 egg or 2 eggs and measure out that amount of scrambled egg powder, put it into a baggie, and use it in the jar in place of this. I really, really try to have my meals be just dump and go. I really don't like to have extra steps, extra baggies. I mean, I do sometimes when that's the only way to do it, but if I can find another way to do it and to have it be just all ready, dump, add water, and go, then that's how I like to have it. But this is another option for you. A lot of powdered eggs you can get. They work great in baking, which is another good reason to have these on hand, but they don't taste good on their own as eggs. This one does. It tastes just like fresh eggs. Most people don't even know the difference. But I am going with these pre-cooked scrambled eggs. Another thing is that some people don't really like the texture of scrambled eggs that have been cooked and freeze-dried afterwards, whether they purchase them or they freeze-dry them themselves. Some people think they have a little bit of an odd texture. So that might be another reason that you might choose to do the scrambled egg powder. The texture of these, at least in the fried rice, doesn't bother us at all. Maybe if we were eating them as a meal on their own, maybe we wouldn't like them as much, but in the fried rice, it works really well. And like I said, it saves me that extra step and makes this just a dump and go meal, which I really like. So I'm doing 1/2 cup of the scrambled eggs. Now, if you're using the egg powder, you'll want to look at the instructions on the side of the can of whatever eggs you use. But for those that I showed you, it's 2 tablespoons of powder, 3 tablespoons of water makes 1 egg. So you could either do 2 tablespoons for 1 egg, or 1/4 cup if you wanted 2 eggs worth of scrambled eggs. And then just make sure you note on your instructions, your cooking instructions, how you have to prepare that egg. And you would just mix it up, cook it up in the pan really quickly before you get started, then cook the rest of the dish and stir the eggs in at the end. Once again, next I'm going to add my sauce ingredients. And once again, I'm starting with soy sauce powder. And again, 1/4 cup of the soy sauce powder. Next, I'm adding some freeze-dried minced garlic, and I'm doing 1/2 tablespoon of this, which is also the same as 1.5 teaspoons, because 1 tablespoon is 3 teaspoons. So 1/2 tablespoon is 1.5 teaspoons. So if you don't happen to have a set that includes the 1/2 tablespoon, you could just measure 1.5 teaspoons. So there's my freeze-dried minced garlic. And next I'm adding some sherry wine powder. Now this is a different ingredient. I really like this. I love using this. This is because if you look at a lot of fried rice recipes, a lot of them, if they're making it from scratch, use a Shaoxing wine, which is like a Chinese wine. And that is not something I've ever found in a powdered form, but sherry can be a substitute for it. And I like to use sherry and wines in a lot of my cooking. I just love the flavor that it gives. So I do like to keep this on hand. But if you don't want to purchase this 4 meals in a jar, then I'm sure you could leave it out and it would be okay. I think this just adds a little nuance to the flavor. And I use this in other things like my stroganoff and stroganoff soup and lots of different recipes like that. And of course, I'll have a link down below to where I found this because it's hard to find and it's something that people are always asking me about. And the site where I find this, they also have I think a Chablis powder and some sort of red wine powder as well. I'm using 2 teaspoons of the sherry powder. And next I'm using some sugar. My sugar bin is really big, so I didn't put it up here on the counter, but this is just plain white sugar, and I'm using 1 teaspoon. And then I'm using 1.5 teaspoons, which once again is half a tablespoon of chicken bouillon. Now, if you were doing, for pork or chicken, I would definitely use chicken bouillon. If you're doing a beef fried rice or a beef lo mein, you could substitute the chicken bouillon for a beef bouillon. If you're doing like a shrimp or something, I actually even have a shrimp bouillon. And there's ham bouillon, depending on what type of protein you're using. So there's 1.5 teaspoons of the chicken bouillon. And like I mentioned with this one as well, if you want it to be free of MSG, you're going to want to use a different brand of bouillon than this one. Next, I'm going to add my veggies. I'm going to start with green peas because I feel like peas is a really classic thing in fried rice. I think any of those classic mixed vegetables like peas, carrots, green beans, corn, any of those go great in fried rice. But you could really, once again, use any veggies you like. And I'm going to use 1/3 cup of the peas. And next, I'm going to use my carrots. And once again, I'm using 1/8 cup or 2 tablespoons. Now, it's important to note that these are dehydrated carrots, and that's why I'm using such a small measurement, because dehydrated items will swell a lot more because they shrivel up so much when they're dehydrated. And the other thing is dehydrated carrots especially have a really strong flavor that I find to be too much if I use much more than this. But it's a lot harder to find freeze-dried carrots, especially commercially, because the quality tends to suffer after freeze-drying quite often. So a lot of commercial companies won't touch them because they don't want to have a lot of complaints later. So if you happen to have freeze-dried carrots, you could certainly substitute them. I would try to bump the amount up a little bit. But these dehydrated ones work just great in this dish. And they're a lot easier to find. Next, I'm going to add some green beans. Now, I have done this with just the peas and carrots. But like I mentioned, the green beans are on sale right now, and so I thought they would be a good addition to this fried rice. So like the peas, I'm also going to use 1/3 cup of the green beans. And then I'm going to use some onion slices. Oh, those smell really, really good. And for the onion slices, I am using 1/4 cup. Now, once again, you can use what you have. This is just a veggie. It's a little more of a seasoning veggie, so I feel like you probably want to add onions of some sort, but if what you have is chopped onions and not the slices, then by all means use the chopped onions. These are just slightly bigger pieces, and like the pork and the green beans, I believe I got them on sale. Now, incidentally, with freeze-dried food, there's different things on sale all the time, and sometimes there's some really significant savings as well. So if you want to know when some of these ingredients go on sale so that you don't miss out, text alert to my number at the bottom of the screen, and I'll put you on my list to make sure that you find out whenever there's a big sale or a new coupon code. So now all that's left to add is the rice. I am using instant rice, and that's what makes this dish cook so quickly. And because all of the freeze-dried ingredients are ready very, very quickly, by using an instant rice, we're not going to overcook those. It also means that we can use very little fuel, because even if we just bring the water to a boil and then turn it off, it's only going to need to sit for 10 or 15 minutes and it would be done. It also makes these meals great for things like camping and backpacking. Now, you could use an instant white rice like I've got here, or you could use instant brown rice. Whatever you've got, whatever your family prefers, whatever you can get on sale, that's what you can use. For the instant rice, I'm going to be using 1.5 cups. So I've got 1 cup, and then I've got my last 1/2 cup. So then on the top of this jar, just like the other jar, I'm going to add my sesame oil packet. This adds a really, really nice flavor to this fried rice, makes it taste a little bit more authentic. And also can help give it a little bit of that sheen that, like, your takeout food usually has. So I'm going to go ahead and put my sesame oil packet in. Now, if I was putting this away for long-term storage, I would add an oxygen absorber as well. Remember, if you're using the scrambled egg powder, don't forget to put your packet of scrambled egg on the top. You would have more room in this jar because you didn't add the scrambled egg pieces. And then we will just add the lid. And this jar is ready to go on the shelf, or in our case, right in the pot. I'm going to cook this one on the butane stove as well. And I'm going to be using a medium-size saucepan. So I guess that's an important point that needs to be made. This fried rice is actually not fried. So this is more like unfried rice. So it's going to have all the flavors of fried rice, but we're not going to have to do all the separate frying and sauteing of everything. So this is going to come together super fast and easy, which is one of the hallmarks of a meal in a jar. So I'm going to take my jar and I'm going to open it up. I'm going to remove the packet of sesame oil. Set that aside. And I'm going to go ahead and empty the rest of the contents of the jar right into my pot. Now you can see that some of the soy sauce powder and other powdered items remain in the jar. So I need 2.5 cups of water, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour it into the jar to rinse all that out to make sure we get all of our flavors that we want in our meal. So I've got 2.5 cups of water. I'm going to go ahead and just start by pouring that into my, my jar. Now I'm starting with cold water for this meal, but for this particular meal, I don't think it really matters much. Sometimes it does. Often it's preferable to start with cold water. For this particular meal, it's not going to really matter. In fact, you could probably just pour boiling water over this, and if you could put a lid on it and let it set and maybe insulate the pot a little bit, it should even cook that way. I'm just going to give this a mix and get everything moistened and everything blended all together. That smells really, really good. And it doesn't even have the sesame oil in it yet. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and apply the heat. And I'm going to have it up pretty hot because it's okay to bring this up to a boil pretty quickly. I've got a lid for my pot here, so I'm going to go ahead and put this on just to keep the heat contained as much as possible, because if this was, a power outage situation and we had to rely on this, we'd want to save as much fuel as we could. I'm going to put the lid on, but I'm going to pay attention because as soon as it boils, we're going to want to give it some attention and not let it boil over. All right, I don't even think this has been on the heat even a minute, and you can see it's starting to simmer around the edges. I'm just going to give it a little bit of a stir, and we're going to let it come up to a little bit more of a boil. All right, so now this is boiling. I'm going to turn this down, and I'm just going to simmer it for about 5 minutes. That's all it needs, and then I'm going to be just letting it set after that. And like I mentioned, if you wanted to really conserve fuel, I think you would be okay just to turn it off at this point and just let it set covered. But I'm going to turn it down as low as I can for 5 minutes. Okay, so it's been 5 minutes. I'm going to turn the heat off. I did toss this around like this once during that 5 minutes just to get things brought up from the bottom to the top, because most of the liquid is at the bottom. So at this point, we're just going to leave this set covered. Now you can see right here, I have kind of a larger chunk of pork, which actually seems like it's pretty tender. So I guess that's not going to be an issue, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. You can break it up just like that right against the side of the pan with your spoon if you end up with any chunks that you are having trouble with. And of course, one of the keys with freeze-dried food, I'm going to go ahead and put the lid back on. I have the heat off, but I'm going to keep the lid on for about 10 more minutes. One of the keys with freeze-dried food, if it doesn't seem to be getting quite to the texture that it should, it's usually either a little more water or a little more time. So this, the little bit of extra time that I'm going to give this is going to allow any remaining liquid to be soaked up into the rice and into the meat and into the vegetables, and it's all going to be the perfect texture. So about 10 more minutes and this should be ready to eat. It's just sitting off the heat. So again, you can toss this a time or two in between just to redistribute everything. And you can see actually the moisture is pretty much all gone from this. So I'll bet this is ready, and it's only been about 6 minutes. But I'm going to just let it set a little bit longer in case any of the meat or egg needs to absorb a little bit more moisture. Okay, it has been 10 minutes. And you can see that all of the moisture is absorbed and this rice is the perfect texture. We have got our pork fried rice. All that remains to be done is to open up our sesame oil packet and put this on. Now, I would encourage you, even if you're not familiar with the flavors of sesame oil, to try it. If you don't want to buy these packets, maybe you have a bottle of sesame oil around your house that you could just drizzle a little bit on. We always have sesame oil around for recipes. And my kids even will cook just plain ramen noodles. And instead of the seasoning packet, they'll put on a little bit of oyster sauce and a little bit of sesame oil and mix that up, and it's really tasty. But it really does just add another dimension to these recipes and a really authentic flavor. Now, Mr. Wicked Prepared would probably tell you he didn't like sesame oil, and he probably would smell it or look at it and just tell you that he didn't like it. But I had him try this dish with and without it, and he preferred the one with it. So if that tells you anything. If you are new to sesame oil, you're not sure if you like it, just try, drizzle a little bit on at a time and start with a little bit and then add more as you go. This is going to also give it a little bit of that sort of fried essence, I guess, because when you fry something, you would fry it with oil. So this is going to add a little bit of that sheen of oil to give it a little bit more of an authentic fried rice experience. And it just smells so good. So this is ready to serve. There we go. I am just going to grab a fork and give it a try. That is good. That had some really great flavors. Now, I will say the egg, even though I picked out the egg and I left the bacon behind, the egg still has a little bit of a smoky bacon flavor to it, which adds a whole nother dimension to this dish, which is actually really good. But if you don't think you'd like that, that would be another argument for using the powdered scrambled egg mix and just making your own eggs. But it is really super tasty. I like the texture of the egg in this. The pork is great. The texture is good on this. This is a really delicious, delicious dish that would definitely curb our takeout cravings. Two more recipes for your prepper pantry and your everyday pantry that are super versatile to make your own and create endless meals for your shelves. Nowhere else are you going to find time-saving convenience food that contains everything, including meat and veggies, all in one shelf-stable package. It's truly amazing what these jars can do. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a chopsticks emoji down in the comments and check out this video next for another Asian takeout inspired dish and see how to make sweet and sour chicken in a jar. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.